Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Hardfire TV. Thank you for watching. My name is Cameron Weber. I'm the producer and host and director today, while our director is stuck at the work phone. Today, we're going to talk about the state of New York City's economy and one possible solution for the city's financial problems. Specifically, we're talking about the public housing and the national housing, or the New York City Housing Administration, New York City Housing Administration. And I learned from Matthew, one of our guests on one of our shows, that we talked about the housing administration before, and he looked it up, and it has the Google search for the most corruption or something like that. Didn't you do that, Matthew, when we talked about it?
Yeah,
I
I
forget
forget what it was.
homelessness. When we did a show on homelessness on the site.
Yeah. Right, correct.
Today we have on the show Matthew Morgan. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here as always.
Right, and should I say that you're?
I'm the chair of the Brooklyn Libertarian Party, former Libertarian City Council candidate, community leader, and Brooklyn fan of Brooklyn.
Right. You've been the chair of the Brooklyn Libertarian Party you've held it down for a good number of good while.
It's starting to look like a dictatorship. I'm just waiting for the next. I'm just waiting for the next person to come around and.
Yeah. You always need secession plans. And then also Melissa Wilcox, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me again. I'm the former housing director at a nonprofit.
Oh, okay. So you know about housing, so that's perfect. Yeah. And then Matthew is also interested in zoning related housing. Anyway, thank you. So we'll start by putting the finances of New York City in perspective. I'll show a New York Times article. The New York Times describes the city's post-COVID era situation. I call it the post-COVID era, but we're still kind of in the COVID era because all the federal government bailout money hasn't been spent yet. But the city's tax and spend policies drive businesses away from New York City to places like Florida and Texas. One of our most popular programs on Hardfire is Why People Want to Leave New York, and that and all our other shows are available on YouTube. Okay, unemployment in the city is twice the national average. Commercial building occupancy rates are down to only about 50% after the COVID work from home, down from 90% before COVID. Subway ridership is only around 40% of what it was before COVID. You'll see from the New York Times article, you can't see that on the screen. You'll see that the city faces a $10 billion shortage. Yeah, the only reason the budget deficit isn't worse is because the city received $8 billion in COVID relief from the federal government. I propose that the current situation is not economically sustainable. What do you think? Or do you think that would just keep getting bailed out by the federal government, so it doesn't really matter?
I think that certainly seems like it'll be a possibility, but because overall the economy is doing surprisingly well. I'm shocked how well the economy is doing at large. So getting bailed out seems like a possibility, at least for the next year or two, but you can't keep doing that. And this level of spending and even the increase in spending year over year is not sustainable. Like a little increase is obviously, that's if there's economic growth to justify it, that's fine. But the big leaps by tens of billions of dollars in New York City is not sustainable, and it's not justified.
Right. And one of the things I forgot to mention is that people are leaving New York City, and there's it's only less than 1% of the population left in 2023, less than 1%. So when people say people are
Right.
in New York City, it's really less than 1% of the population is left. The city schools are down about 10%, 8% since COVID, public schooling. So anyway, so right, so New York City's always had that financial troubles, right?
Right.
So my question is, don't people want to live there anyway? I mean,
I think people do want to live here. The cost of living continues to increase, and unaffordable apartments continue to not be there or available. And let's face it, we don't have enough space in the city to build more housing. There are places, but we just continue to make a high rise higher to put more people in it. So I do think people want to live here, but when you have the option to go to a state like you mentioned, Cameron, Texas or Florida, cost of living there is lower, and their taxes aren't as much money. So they have a good justification to leave oftentimes, and some just lose their jobs because so many of different closures are happening. So I think, while people would like to live here, it really, when you look across the country, elderly people and disabled people and people who become unemployed often move because they know that the cost of living is lower someplace, and they stay there because of that reason.
yeah, especially the people my age have elderly parents, and it's very difficult for them to privately put their elderly parents somewhere in the New York City area. But they have no intention of leaving the New York City.
I don't know if I really buy, like, when I see the statistics of like what it costs, like I saw that on average car insurance was up 20% year over year. Gas prices are up, like, car notes are up, and those are required to live anywhere else. And that's like $800. So if you're paying like 900, 1,000 to live in Texas for rent or for an apartment, you got to tack on another 800. So if you think that person who's spending $1,800 for a one bedroom is crazy, at least they can walk everywhere they need to go. You need to drive, and you're spending all that money.
That's very,
So I think that's I think a lot of people do want to live in New York City, and I disagree. I think there is a lot of space left for us to build, but I don't really mind high rises. But I definitely think that it shouldn't just be on New York City to accommodate everybody that wants to move to a city. It should be like Biden's talked a little bit. He's mentioned about building more in these cities, but I think every city should take it upon themselves to be like, hey, we need to build. It should be a competition to get all these
Yeah.
people.
I mean, I took many years before I had the courage to live in New York City, and I always wanted to live in New York City, and I live in New York City, and now people get there to kind of go to New York City for under the. But right, considering the fiscal drain, what's your take on the immigration situation and the sanctuary city as a fiscal drain? I mean, that's costing us how many hundreds of millions of dollars a month just to put the immigrants into the hotels?
Right. I mean, it's a policy that shoots us in the foot.
Yeah.
Like I said it right when we got here, just give them work permits.
Yeah.
Just like, and then they're just like, but instead they just keep them in the hotels, and they're all working anyways in the black market. I mean, I work with them through an organization, and they live right across the street, and I see them leaving the hotel at 6 a.m. to go to work just like I am at that same time. But it's just like, that's tax money that we're missing out on by not giving them,
They're in the underground tax account,
That and
underground.
just as
exactly.
the asylum seekers, they can go to the Division of Housing and Refugee Services, and they can get a lot of services. They can get cash benefits of up to 2 years, utility and housing vouchers. They can also get food assistance. So, you're looking at them, like you said, they're working under the table. and we know that they're doing it, but yet they're still getting these services. And I I think that I think a lot of people thought up front that the housing for them, especially over to Floyd Bennett Field, that it was a great idea, but in reality it didn't work. Number one, it was too costly. Number two, you can't put people up in nice hotels for a while when they first get here and then kick them out and expect them to basically live in a camp. So
It's a heartless political statement to take the people and go to New York City, because we're in the Texas border, they need people to live there. It's so sparsely populated in certain parts of Texas. Why ship them to New York City? It's just a political statement.
Right.
Okay, so well, let's say for the sake of argument, let's assume that most people want the city to be fiscally responsible, whether or not we're going to go with this, rethink the sanctuary city or not. One of the biggest sinkholes in New York City is the housing administration. The city deficit of 10 billion is almost nothing compared to the almost 80 billion that the housing administration needs to repair its buildings. And I'll put up an article, research article from the city. New York City Housing Administration now needs 78 billion to fix aging buildings as costs surge from 2017 estimate. Right, we went through COVID, the easy money period, the fiscal stimulus costs have gone up a lot for many things. And yes, and the city article talks about the national. Okay, here now we're talking specifically about the housing administration. The city article of July 2023 talks about the national emergency rent moratorium for the COVID era. Today, the rent collection rate of public housing is around 60% compared to 90% before COVID. So, right. So it's hard to be fiscally responsible if you've done the moratoriums, people become used to it, and now they're getting 30% less revenues. But my question is, so why does that matter? Shouldn't all social services be free? And maybe right? Why, if some services are going to be free, why shouldn't also social services be free? And maybe the tenants might have a good reason for not paying the rent there. They need $80 billion in repairs. Right? So what do you think of should also social services be free? What do you think? What do you think of that?
I think it would be awfully hard for the rent to be free. You know, you have to have some kind of income, whether you're a management building or NYCHA, to be able to fix up and do things. And I've been in NYCHA buildings, and while they're pouring all this money into them, they're not updated, most of them. Outside might be, but not the inside.
Right.
And you have people that are in there and they're just like, they wait and wait forever to get repairs made, and then they're band-aided repairs a lot of the times. And so, and sometimes the supply line is slow on some of the things that they need to repair things in their apartment. I know that that's been a problem in the past. So I think there's a lot of reason for not to give people free rent, but not just I think they need some incentive too to keep their apartment nice. If they're not paying any rent and it's no money out of their pocket, then why would they keep it nice for the next person that has to come in there? And the reason somebody might not pay rent, there's a lot of reasons. You know, like the repair issues taking so long.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's infestations in those buildings, and they go from one apartment to the other apartment. People get upset because they're not the problem. There's, you know, breakage of water leaks often. Sometimes in the winter, I hear complaints that, you know, the heat's not turned on till a certain time of the year. I think it's like October.
Yeah,
And then they tell me how
tricky.
cold it is in their apartment. And it's just like, you know, and then this whole thing with the stoves, the gas stoves, like some people, that's all I understand that issue. But also I think people should have freedom of choice. And if that's your apartment, then you should be able to decide what you want in that apartment. But you also need to have building or management company or a private person, the super in the building, make sure that, they're also doing their job. And I think many people are afraid to call 311 because they're afraid of retaliation.
So you're saying, yes, they might have a good reason for not paying the rent.
Exactly.
So,
Or they may end up sick and in the hospital and they just can't afford to pay their rent, for a few months or whatnot.
someone once told me that the COVID era and through today is a silent depression. People are are rethinking what they're up to. There was a lot of people have loved ones who died. Okay, but back to the social services idea. So if we put an income level to where people have to pay more rent or more for any other social service, this just means that people will stop trying to earn more, else cheat on their income tax. Meaning, let's say you have a minimum, if you make a certain amount of money, then you're no longer eligible to be in the public housing, or you're no longer eligible to ride the subway for free, or you're no longer eligible for whatever. So that's one of the reasons I think that if we're going to have social services that are available, that they shouldn't be means tested. They should be available to everyone. And when you start means testing, that's when people start fabricating your tax returns, and they start, or they just say, why should I be self-sufficient if it'll be provided to me? Right? So I just don't like that idea. And I understand. Right. I mean, for many people, healthcare is free. Right? Okay. So let's assume that everything is free, but what are we going to do with the $80 billion? Where's the $80 billion that we need to keep the NYCHA? Is that how you pronounce it? NYCHA buildings from falling down. Where are we going to get that $80 billion? If the city's, So let's talk about ways the city can stop NYCHA from being another sinkhole. I'm going to mention the word privatization. We need to define what privatization is in public housing. HUD, federal agency HUD, has a program called Residential Assistance Demonstration. The largest one was recently announced for the Edenwald houses in the Bronx, the city's largest housing project. The program is more of a form of corporate welfare than privatization. Developers get tax breaks and government guaranteed debt to refurbish the squalid projects, and then the tenants pay 30% of their salaries for rent. Right? So that's the deal. That's the means tested. They pay 30%. And of course,
better known as RAD.
Yeah, it's a RAD program. So
that's usually what people call it, RAD. At least that's what I hear people call it.
Oh, you know people who know about that program.
Yeah, a couple of the buildings right here in Gowanus are under RAD.
RAD programs. Right.
Yep.
So the tenants pay, the private developer gets subsidies or government guaranteed debt to refurbish the buildings. Then the tenants move in, and then they pay only 30% of their salaries or income for the rent. And I know many people in New York City pay 60% of their rent because they want to of their income for rent because they want to live here for so much, right? Anyway, so the 300,000 people in public housing would lose the incentive to improve their lives and raise their way out of poverty, because the more they make, the more rent they have. This also means that developers will get more subsidies and easy money later on when it comes to maintain the buildings, because rents will stagnate. Right, so we're just setting up another program of bailouts. Am I right or wrong?
I can see that. Yeah.
Melissa, what do you think of this?
Well, in reality, You know, HPD has a website called Housing Connect 2.0. You go on there and you look at, they say for these incentives, they'll have so many units for this person and that person. And for the low income people, most of the time, there's very few units. It's like maybe 4 or 5, unless it's a larger building. And then most of the time, it's hard to accommodate the handicapped, all the handicapped people that apply or disabled the people that apply, and probably others as well that really need like a bottom floor apartment to evacuate from a fire instead of having to stay in place on a 10th floor or 14th floor, whatever floor you're on. And I also think that if you go on and you look at some of the areas where this housing, like you said, is being developed, nobody wants to move out of their neighborhood. If they have family here, usually they want to stay in the neighborhood their family's in. And most of these developments like are going up in the Bronx like crazy right now.
What
You
kind of
know, and
development?
I think that that's a difficult place for people to live.
Yeah.
I know I've been in the Bronx. There's areas that I've been in to NYCHA housing that I wouldn't feel safe living there at night. That's my own opinion.
Melissa, they're building new housing,
There's a lot of developments going up in the Bronx, and also they have that
city-owned
the
buildings.
big one called City. I can't think of it off the top of my head right now, but it's a huge one that's already been up for a while, and
The
you
South
know
Bronx is crazy right now.
there's because it's the most affordable, I think, of the 5 boroughs to build in right now.
Right.
I'd like to look at it in more detail, a point that you both that you disagree on a little bit in terms of can the city sustain more people, right? And Matthew, I know one of your big thing is zoning laws and liberalized zoning laws. Instead of having to build big housing projects where you put everyone who's down on the left in the same building, what you could do is liberalize the housing laws so people can then build onto their own homes in New York City to have their own rental
Right.
spaces. And those rental spaces would be decentralized and managed with a profit motive, so people would have the incentive to maintain it.
Right.
And you
Like I
won't,
said that I did the math and like the large super duper large building on that Billionaires Row in Manhattan, the really tall skinny one,
yeah, right.
has like 400 units. And if you go to like the brownstones here where I live in Park Slope, between just 4th and 5th Avenue, if you add 2 or 3 stories to those 3-story brownstones and make them a comfortable 5 or 6, which there are many other 5 or 6-story brownstone buildings in the neighborhood, it
Right.
would, in just one block on each side, on each brownstone, just add 2 stories, it would equal one of those massive skyscrapers in terms of how many units.
And that,
So if you allowed that to happen throughout the city, it would really relieve a lot of pressure, I think.
and there's a way to do that so it's not really ugly. They do that. I've seen where you do modern additions to historical buildings like our brownstones that really look good. I've seen those in Melbourne and Vancouver.
Don't Let's not get into architectural. I'm personally a huge fan of the architectural movement of adding a modern take on to old buildings. Like the main example is like the glass pyramid at the Louvre
Yeah,
Museum,
that's a good example.
modern and ancient or whatever. To me,
Sure.
that's very beautiful, and I love stuff like that. Most people hate that. They're like, what is this ugly modern thing doing here amongst this beautiful old architecture? And I'm like, it's awesome. What
Yeah,
a bridge to
that's
build.
a whole nother point. But the point is it
Right.
can be done, and it doesn't have to be centrally planned, and it doesn't have to have $80 billion in needed repairs like Melissa was mentioning, all these things that need to be
Right.
done to the buildings.
Like NYCHA shouldn't need to provide housing to so many people. It should
Right.
really just be for like a small portion of the city. It shouldn't be for, you know, 10, 20% of the people. It shouldn't be for millions. It should just be for people who desperately need housing.
Well, maybe with this fiscal crisis occurring in New York City and as highlighted by the sanctuary city, people may start to realize that there needs to be alternatives.
Exactly.
So liberalizing zoning and decentralizing it is one good idea. And it's been done in other cities.
I think we also desperately need an emergency center that can kind of intake, 20 to 30,000 people and,
give them work.
Yeah, because like, if a giant, if the grid goes down and people don't have electricity for a week or two, or, there's giant flooding because of climate change, there needs to be a place in the city that can take in this massive amount of people where we don't need to, rely on private businesses like hotels who are going to overcharge the city more money because they can take advantage of them.
Well, sure. It's the idea behind social services. You have one problem, and it's like a mushroom growing. All these special interests growing on a particular problem. But
Right.
Believe it or not, we only have a couple minutes left.
I'd like to just say one thing that I think we need to mention in this episode is how insane it is. All those people who were arrested for taking bribes at NYCHA, who were taking bribes from contractors to get certain contracts to repair the buildings. And when I saw that, it was one of those things where it's just like, you knew it was happening, right? You knew there was corruption. And then all these people get arrested for basically taking bribes from contractors. And it was this moment where I was just like, I felt vindicated.
Yeah. We've been talking about that.
You could tell everybody about how NYCHA was corrupt, and the FBI comes and puts 200 plus NYCHA people in jail, and you're just like, yes, I was right.
Well, thank you very much. We're finished with our program. Thank you to Matthew. Thank you to Melissa for participating in today's discussions. Besides, thank you for watching Hardfire TV. Each of our monthly episodes appears on Brooklyn Free Speech Network. The third Tuesday of every month. It appears six times during the third week of every month. And we have more than 50 programs on our YouTube channel. Just search for Hardfire and Brooklyn Free Speech. See you next time. Thank you.